From its teaser as a game that would set a new standard for the series all the way back in 2013, through the era of multiple delays and announcements from which the name Breath of the Wild was revealed to the world as was one of the most widely acclaimed trailers in gaming history, and ending on March 3rd with its monumental release. This is the historic tale of The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. Being Nintendo's first open-world game on such a massive scale, Breath of the Wild was a challenge unlike any the company had ever dealt with. One of Aonuma's first statements on the game was that it would challenge the conventions of what the series had become known for. Containing a world thwarting even the size of Skyrim's, a heavily complex physics engine, and hundreds if not thousands of different quests, items, NPCs, enemies, and environments to program, it was no doubt that the game would take an extraordinarily long time to develop. However, none of us could have imagined that this game, teased in 2013 with an initial Wii U launch frame of 2015, would become a cross-platform launch title for the Nintendo Switch, finally releasing on March 3rd, 2017, 4 years after its initial teaser and 5 after it began development. From fans' perspectives, we went long stretches of time with no information only to witness a delay numerous times. It was clear through this lack of public information that the game was either falling apart at its seams, or was something that needed every second it could get to perfect and it would merely need more time. The latter was luckily true, as we all found out in 2016 when the name Breath of the Wild was unveiled to the world, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We all know this game released to the praise of millions on that monumental day nearly 4 years ago, but I'd like to rewind to before anyone outside of Nintendo even knew of its existence and work my way up through every tease, trailer, and delay up until that date. Even before we were teased with a new Zelda Wii U game in the works in 2013, fans of the series had already begun speculating over what the next game in the franchise might contain, thanks to this tech demo made solely for the purpose of displaying what Nintendo's new console could do, in 2011 before it even released. Fans at the time didn't know that, however. While it was known that this video was a tech demo, many tech demos have inspired games and even become games on their own. Super Mario 128 was a GameCube tech demo, but eventually inspired Pikmin. Luigi's Mansion, a fan favorite, started as nothing more than a tech demo. Naturally, people had their questions as to whether or not something as visually impressive as this was really only meant to showcase the Wii U's capabilities. Many believed that what they were seeing was actually the humble beginnings of the next mainline Zelda release, but oh, how wrong they were. As of 2011, development for Breath of the Wild had not yet started. However, I can imagine that the idea had already been conceptualized and was being diligently worked on while fans were marveling over the aforementioned demo. It must have been sometime around the release of this demo that the Breath of the Wild dev team created an early prototype to get a feel for open world design and test some ideas they had, in the style of the original Legend of Zelda. This prototype was revealed on March 1st, 2017, 2 days before the game was released, but it's unknown exactly when it was started, though I can assume it was around 2011 or 2012, as early 2013 was when the actual development had begun. The retro prototype was a simplistic way to test the waters of open world gameplay, as Nintendo was still new to the genre. This, as well as looking to Skyrim, another well-known open world game, for inspiration, were two of presumably dozens of ideas Aonuma and others had while working on the game in order to get accustomed to the new style of gameplay. It was clear that at this point the team had a fairly solid idea of what they wanted Breath of the Wild to be, because on January 23rd, 2013, the series producer, Eiji Aonuma, during a Nintendo Direct showed up to talk about the driving theme behind the game's development, stating that rethinking the conventions of Zelda was the team's goal in its simplest form. He went on to mention that the linearity of having to complete events in a certain order would be abolished, almost as a way to redeem the series after Skyward Sword was negatively received due to there being too much linearity, and signed off by promising the Wind Waker, now given an HD treatment, as a way to appease hungry fans while they waited for the new game's release. 3 Hyrule Warriors, 1 Wind Waker HD, A Link Between Worlds, Majora's Mask 3D, Triforce Heroes, and Twilight Princess HD later, and Breath of the Wild was still a year out on the horizon. And that was all that was said, as the game was still extremely early in development. Nothing was visually shown off until E3 2014, when Aonuma once again showed his face, this time talking about the Wind Waker and how even though it feels interconnected thanks to the implementation of the Great Sea, every individual area was still segregated from the others, once again heavily hinting that he wanted the new game to have a broad, open world. And this was reinforced as he turned his head and stated,
"This is the new world of Zelda."
Whilst in front of beautiful rolling fields of green, blades of grass swaying in the wind, and numerous mountains looming in the background, all of which could supposedly be reached if the player traveled far enough. The interconnectivity of this world was heavily stressed, and Aonuma-san made certain to push the fact that this game's ability to allow its players to go wherever they want from the very start would give everyone the freedom of exploration they so desperately desired. As the series producer faded off screen, what we all thought was merely a still shot of one of the game's areas seamlessly transitioned into Breath of the Wild's first official trailer. What was immediately evident before the action even began was the game's art style. Being an open world game, it had a level of realism not quite to the extent of Twilight Princess's, but it looked realistic enough to be able to display what looked like a real place. These fields looked like an area I'd actually be able to find out there in the world, minus the pseudo cell shading, which appeared as though a toned down version of Wind Waker's style, and this. That's right, at this point many of the core elements of Breath of the Wild had been set in stone already. While it's impossible to know just how far development had gotten at the time of this trailer, we can take a rough guess based on some key elements pinpointed in it. Namely, the Guardian chasing Link, the ancient arrow it's weak to, and the signature blue tunic Link bore as he loosed said arrow. The Guardian and arrow show that the concept of ancient technology had already been conceived, and so shrines, the tech labs, and the divine beast, amongst many other things, must have at least been in the process of being created at this point. While the appearance of Link's champion's tunic means that the other champions were also implemented by now. The trailer itself showed off just how powerful these guardians can be, and as Aonuma stated beforehand that strong enemies could be roaming about any corner of the world, it was clear that this massive malicious machine would not be the only one of its kind. While it was hard to focus on much, what with the Guardian obliterating the landscape and all, we were also given a brief glimpse of another pre-release area of the game. This one appearing to be somewhere in the woods of Faron due to the ancient relics littered about, which bear similarities to those in the final game's version of the woods, and the overall damp lushness of the area. This place looked alive, it looked diverse, just like the grassy plains present before it, as though hundreds of different bugs, plants, and landforms could be discovered here, which is exactly how the final game turned out to be, diverse. The trailer finally ended as Link loosed his ancient arrow and the screen faded to white with 2015 written for all to see. Again, we had a lull before more information was revealed, though a much shorter one this time, as in December of 2014, Eiji Aonuma appeared once again, this time at the Game Awards, alongside the creator of Super Mario, Shigeru Miyamoto, to show off the first official glimpse of the new Zelda's gameplay. A fair bit of new gimmicks and mechanics were shown off in this trailer, but before those came another glimpse at how vast this world truly was. By placing Link atop a cliff at sunset, Aonuma gave players one of the most beautiful views they could have asked for. Above, dozens of mountains championed over Link, while below, endless fields to romp around in awaited him. This world, quite honestly, looked as though it would be endless. Though Aonuma-san dismissed this by pulling up the map after placing a pin on a nearby Sheikah tower, revealing that although the world certainly had its boundaries, with such a massive landscape to explore they would seldom be encountered. The series producer, with gamepad in hand, then did the unthinkable and jumped off the cliff, only to pull out the sailing cloth present in Skyward Sword and glide through the sky, negating any fear of fall damage entirely. This ability to soar through the air was perhaps the biggest reveal in this chunk of gameplay, but there's still more to discuss, as the last few segments shown off took place on horseback. Nothing new to the franchise, yet still, knowing that traversing such a massive world could be made faster whilst riding a horse, alongside knowing that the player can still utilize their sword and bow while doing so, was very exciting. Quite a lot was shown off here, and naturally, with the game still being a ways off, many things that were seen appeared slightly different from their post-release counterparts. For starters, the paraglider, which contained retains a more antique look in Breath of the Wild, was stylized exactly like Skyward Sword's sailing cloth back when it was revealed. The Sheikah Towers had a more stark, rigid shape, the sound effect when an enemy was struck with an arrow changed drastically, and the map, while sharing the same general structure as it did 3 years later, certainly looked a tad different, as did the game's general overlays. In fact, the game as a whole had a slightly washed out look back then, appearing much less crisp and a lot more fuzzy, and though that can be expected in hindsight considering its release was a long ways off, at the time everyone thought it was nearly complete and would still be releasing in 2015.
Well, 2015 came and went, as did 2016, yet still the game showed no sign of releasing. This was the era of delays.
Although there were only 2 major ones to speak of, with the first coming on March 27, 2015. A relatively brief video was released of Aonuma simply stating that due to the expansive nature of the game, the team had been continuing to conjure up more and more ideas, and that the game would need more time in order for them all to be implemented. He stressed that this delay would allow the next Zelda release to achieve its maximum potential, and that the game when at its fullest would surely reward fans for their patience, and concluded the video with a thank you. It's unknown what ideas the team was having at the time, and it's likely we'll never know. Perhaps they were only then coming up with the idea for runes, Korok seeds, shield surfing. It could have been anything that caused this delay. But unlike in 2015, when another delay rolled around in April of 2016, this time we knew exactly what caused the extended development time: the game's physics engine. With just about every object in Breath of the Wild being capable of player interaction, and all the manipulative runes such as Stasis, Magnesis, and Cryonis being implemented, it's no doubt that the game had to contain some pretty realistic physics, which is nothing new to the gaming industry as a whole, but considering that Nintendo themselves have never worked with such physics in their games before, it made sense for them to need a bit more time. The thing is, at this point, while the game was certainly known to be very large, we hadn't yet got to see any of these realistic physics in action. We only knew they existed because we were told they needed more time to be perfected. This delay also revealed that the game would be launched cross-platform for both the Wii U and the Nintendo NX, which was a codename for the Switch at the time. There's been a lot going on, and we're currently, as of April 2016, just under a year before the game's release. We've experienced only 1 trailer, a bit of gameplay, and 2 delays. The game still lacked a name, and its release date was up in the air. But the slow trickling of information was finally about to turn into a mighty flood, because on July 14th, 2016, E3 began, and Nintendo blew the 3-day-long event out of the water. As evident by these pictures of Nintendo's E3 booth, Breath of the Wild was the primary focus of the company during the expo. Over 4 hours of live gameplay was shown off during their Treehouse event, a number of attendees were allowed to play the game for themselves, and the title was named the most anticipated and talked about game of E3 2016. But before any of that, came the trailer that kicked off Nintendo's year at E3 in the best way possible. The trailer that many can recognize by its first frame alone. The second official trailer for the game that would soon be known to the world as The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. The trailer begins with a single line that I'm sure can still give goosebumps to many.
Open your eyes.
Followed by dozens of panning shots of Hyrule's new vast layout. Grassy plains, rugged canyons, cliffside beaches, serene lakes, and an ancient temple are all visible, teeming with wildlife such as ducks, deer, hawks, and this unknown lumbering foe, later to be known as a Stalnox. The beautiful environments in union with the calming music allowed the first section of this trailer to highlight the peaceful melancholy of the ruined kingdom in which the game takes place. The beginning of the trailer's second main portion is marked with a violent strike of lightning. As rain floods the land and the music reaches its crescendo, Link, our protagonist, is shown gliding into the world. After flaunting the game's impressive environments, the trailer now turns to show off what one can do in such a world. Riding over a bridge, scaling rocks, towers, even mountains, cutting trees to forge a path, skinny dipping, hunting, causing wildfires, cooking, rolling boulders, freezing water, manipulating metal. This world is yours to explore and yours to conquer. Speaking of conquering, this phase of the trailer ends with Link atop a massive tower, watching as Hyrule Castle is taken over by a mysterious dark smog resembling the series villain Ganon. Following a halt in the music that caused a bit of controversy over whether or not it was musically correct, came the third phase of the trailer, which at first took a focus on combat, showing Link backflipping, spin attacking, deflecting with his shield, whilst wielding various different weapons against various different recognizable enemies alongside a new one in the form of a massive rock beast originally known as a Step-Talus before being renamed to the admittedly less cool though more universally understandable Stone-Talus. After a few more shots to remind us fans how huge this world would be and what we'd be able to discover within it, the trailer ended with our first glimpse at the rusted Master Sword. An image that would provoke a plethora of theories, discussions, and speculations, and finally, the reveal of the game's subtitle, Breath of the Wild. After this trailer, a Nintendo Treehouse event followed, which showcased the game's starting area, the Great Plateau. The next 3 days showcased, as I stated, 4 hours of gameplay. Naturally, a lot was shown off in this time, and the game absolutely dominated E3. Though, due to the sheer runtime of these Treehouses, I won't be covering everything here, but they can be easily found over on Nintendo's channel.
There was actually another trailer shown off for the game at E3 that I'm neglected to mention so far, focused all on these guys.
2 trailers, in fact. One showed off a nifty amiibo-based gimmick that allowed Twilight Princess HD save data to be transferred to Breath of the Wild, which would allow the player to have their very own Wolf-Link companion, while the other simply revealed the new amiibo that would be releasing with the game, not yet displaying their functionalities. With the game's release getting closer and closer, yet still unknown to the public, following E3 was when many minor trailers not necessary to talk about began releasing. 30-second advertisements, the Super Bowl Switch trailer, and many more of these less pivotal videos began releasing after the event and up until release. So just know that they were there and that I don't find it necessary to cover them.
December 2016 rolled around, and you know what that means. Another Game Awards event, and another peek at Breath of the Wild, 2 years after its first appearance on the show.
The Life in Ruins trailer. This one tends to get overshadowed as it was crammed between the previous massive trailer and an even bigger one which would be releasing shortly. But it still remains a major point in the game's pre-release timeline, revealing not only one of the game's most beautiful music tracks, but also the trailer's namesake, Life in Ruins. Many clips in the trailer's first half focus on the shambled remains of Hyrule in which life still persists. Civilians roam this world despite its current state, fighting monsters to survive, creating outposts in which they can trade goods and find shelter, rebuilding villages where there's still hope for peace to be restored. It's a beautiful focus to highlight, and it's a shame this one always gets forgotten. The trailer's second half leaves a lot to the imagination, as the Master Sword is shown for a split second alongside an important looking Rito character and even a gargantuan flying machine. So many critical elements are teased here, and as the viewer's mind is racing to speculate, the video ends with a supposed glimpse at the series' namesake herself, Princess Zelda. There was a lot to take in with this one, to where I remember having to watch it at least a dozen times to see just what I could spot hiding in every frame, but compared to what was a mere month away, this trailer was nothing.
January 12th, 2017, or the 13th for some, is a day that I and many others like me will never forget. The day of the Nintendo Switch presentation.
What was perhaps the most exciting gaming-related hour of my life began with a flashy countdown, lasted through the reveals of such masterpieces as Splatoon 2, Super Mario Odyssey, Octopath Traveler, Xenoblade Chronicles 2, and many more. And when we thought it couldn't get any better, ended with one of the most influential trailers in gaming history. The final major trailer for one of the most anticipated games Nintendo has ever created. Within seconds, millions of people around the world could recognize this trailer from a simple sea of blue alone. Starting off slowly, panning shots of environments and wildlife were shown, as was expected by this point, as was another glimpse at the Master Sword, which appeared to be resting ahead of the Great Deku Tree surrounded by Koroks. Wasting no further time, pounding percussion invaded the trailer's music, creating an adventurous feel as Link stood, peering out at the wide world available to him, before a choir joined in and the action began to take off as the main character explored every corner of the world. This action quickly fell, which would typically create a moment of relaxation for our racing minds if it weren't for the fact that with this moment of peace came the solid confirmation of voice acting, causing the hype to only greaten, and as it did, the music burst out again in harmony with a Sheikah Tower from the ground, which preluded the attack of Calamity Ganon and the rise of the kingdom's many threats. Guardians, Taluses, Moldugas, Lizalfos, Hinoxes, a Sheikah traitor, everything is out to destroy this kingdom, and it's up to Link to save it. All these villages, all this land depends on the player. Again, the music ebbs, and the moment of rest is accompanied by monologues from both the Great Deku Tree and an unknown male voice before the camera sweeps and pans to give the grandest view of this world we've seen thus far. And another explosion of action occurs, this one revealing not one but two more titanic animal-themed guardians, and the long-awaited look at Princess Zelda herself. An extraordinary moment immediately turned heart-wrenching with this one shot, but yet again, this trailer gives the viewer not a moment to think, as the greatest and most triumphant explosion yet brings with it the reveal of Gorons, Great Fairies, Garuda, Zora, Rito, all races in harmony, and one last peculiar shot of Zelda herself, followed by Link struggling to get to his feet. It was at this moment, when the gaming community was at its most united, when millions of people stood awestruck by this display of talent and dedication, when not an eye was turned from the spectacle that was this trailer, that The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was given its release date of March 3rd, 2017, an official launch title for the Nintendo Switch. Nearly 4 years ago, and 4 years after its 2013 teaser, we all got our hands on one of the greatest games Nintendo has ever made. And it was everything I could have asked for and more. The build-up to its release, while arduously long, only helped to bring the hype surrounding the game to an insurmountable level. Through teases, delays, and trailers, the anticipation only rose, culminating in the final year leading up to the game, which contained some of the greatest trailers I've ever seen in my life, by such a long shot that my friend and I were able to narrate from memory every clip of the January 2017 trailer in timing with the music. Breath of the Wild is a game that set seemingly impossible to meet expectations and met them anyways, resulting in one of the biggest video game releases of countless lives. The 4-year wait did little to quell the anticipation surrounding the game, instead strengthening it while also giving developers the time they needed to perfect every element of their release, resulting in a game that, while not perfect, comes pretty damn close. It's a game in which most people who've experienced it, including myself, would kill to re-experience for the first time again. Seldom can a game create such a perfect image for itself before release and actually meet that standard. But The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, quite frankly, made it look easy. The game did have DLC that added even more development time, and maybe I'll touch on that one day, but for now, I hope you enjoyed the telling of this game's pre-release history. Keep in mind, I don't research as extensively as I could, and I apologize for potentially getting any dates or information wrong, and if you enjoyed this video, Nintendo themselves posted numerous shorts detailing some development processes of the games, under a playlist titled The Making of Breath of the Wild, which I'll link in the description for whoever wants it. Thank you all so much for watching.